Hey, welcome to this lesson on cultivating a blissful mind, where we'll talk about a kind of natural chain reaction that leads to self-transcendence. And I'll explain what's meant by that. But basically, we talked already about how Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, discovered what's called dependent origination, which is the causes and conditions that lead our mind into a state of agitation and suffering. And that would be a pretty miserable teaching if that's all he figured out. It'd be like if a doctor came to you and said, all right, you have this disease and here's what causes it. But then they didn't give you any kind of medication. So what we're talking about now is transcendent dependent origination. It's the kind of medicine that can lead us into very blissful states of mind and also lead to some of the most profound wisdom into how the mind works. So I think one way to understand this chain reaction is to kind of go in reverse order and say, let's start with the ultimate, which is a mind that has discovered the most profound, liberating, enlightening insights. And what leads to that wisdom? Well, Siddhartha said it's jhana, it's a collected mind, it's samadhi. And that's something that we'll talk about more in the course. But basically, this mind that's stable and can see how things actually work. And so what leads to that? Well, Siddhartha figured out it's contentment. Contentment is the cause for samadhi. And then what leads to that contentment? Well, it's tranquility, tranquility of body and mind. What leads to that tranquility? Well, he found it was joy. And what leads to that joy? Well, he said gladness. So these are other kind of flavors of happiness that have distinct Pali words in the ancient texts. But essentially, making us happy makes us calm, and that makes the mind stable and collected, and that can then provide very deep insights. But here's the key. What leads to that initial gladness of mind? On a micro level, when you're sitting in your meditation, what gives you that kind of spark of gladness where you're now very happy just where you're sitting? You don't need to go to the fridge and get some food. You don't need to, scratch your leg. You don't need to go to sleep. You're just very, very glad to be doing what you're doing. And that part of the formula on the micro level is when the 5 hindrances, which I think of in neuroscience terms as the major prediction errors, are gone from our experience. They're no longer present in our mind. Those 5 hindrances or major prediction errors are sensual desire, basically wanting things, especially, like food and the typical things that we kind of crave after. Dislike or aversion, this includes like anger. And the third is worries. And then this also means like agitation and restlessness. The fourth is sluggishness or kind of dullness and slash lazy mind. And then the fifth is doubt. When there's doubt, am I practicing right? Is this practice even worth it? Those are the 5 main things that kind of prevent us from being glad in the moment. So what this is saying, what this transcendent dependent origination is saying, is that if we can just get ourselves out of the way, if we can just release these 5 hindrances, these 5 major prediction errors, then the mind will naturally be glad. That's just what it does. That's just the way it is if those 5 things aren't going on in the mind. And that means that our work here, using the 4 R's, now I know this is a lot of lists, but we've already been working a lot with the 4 R's. And you don't need to remember exactly which of the 5 hindrances is in your mind. All you know is the mind is distracted. That's what all these hindrances have in common. They pull your mind away. They make you start thinking about this and that. So then we use the 4 R's to recognize, release them, like opening a fist. We open back up our awareness. And then relish, bring up the positive emotion. And that is also going to help with the gladness. And then fourth is remain with that positive feeling. This will lead naturally to the joy, the tranquility, the contentment. And then the mind is sitting stable there in samadhi before, or I would say after a lot of these mental reps. It takes time to kind of release these major prediction errors from the mind and brain, because that's what it's so used to doing. It's used to keeping us alive and trying to pass our genes on. That's what it's been doing for millions of years. There's something very interesting to notice about this sequence, which is that the gladness that comes from not wanting, from not having these hindrances or major prediction errors in the mind and brain, is the gladness of relief. It's the gladness of not wanting. And if we zoom in on a process that we normally go about to satisfy an urge for, let's say, dark chocolate. Okay, I love dark chocolate, so I get this feeling in my body that tells me you should go get some dark chocolate. And it's actually, if I'm paying close attention, that feeling is kind of uncomfortable. It's kind of saying, it's not saying dark chocolate would make you happy. It's saying, I'm going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to do this kind of like little vibration somewhere in my body until you go and get that dark chocolate, which is different than how we think about it, because we think, oh, I'd like to go get dark chocolate, but it's rather I'd like to not feel this agitation, so I'm going to go get the dark chocolate. That's a trick that nature plays. And then we go and we get the thing that we think is going to satisfy us, and there's like a moment of pleasure when it hits our tongue, but then a lot of what we're feeling is the relief of not wanting it anymore. Once we're full and satisfied, there's a kind of relief, like, I no longer want it. And then the brain, the mind, thinks of the next thing that it wants. So what we're doing here in this sequence is we're releasing all those urges until the mind is just glad on its own. Its relief is the reward. And in this way, we see that not wanting is the same psychologically as getting what we want. In fact, it's even better, because then we won't have to go get more of that thing in the future. We won't have as many urges for that thing that we're seeking. There's an interesting study that found the reward system of the brain was activated in these meditative states just by paying attention to the bliss and the joy in the body and the mind. It started this kind of feedback loop where paying attention to the joy brought more joy and more joy into the mind. And then it's almost like the reward system got hijacked in a very healthy way, because instead of paying attention to normally the object in the outside world that would give us pleasure, we pay attention to our own internal joy, that joy and gladness that comes from a positive emotion. And so it kind of feeds on itself into a bigger, more positive emotion. And we'll talk more about that sequence, because it does calm down, but there's kind of this runaway positive feedback loop of just feeling really good within ourselves, not needing things outside of ourselves. So our job then for this kind of self-transcendence, for transcendent dependent origination to occur, is really just to get out of the way. And the way we do that skillfully is using the 4 R's. That is, we recognize when the mind is distracted, when it's wanting this and that, and then we release that, which is just to kind of open the mind back up and to accept whatever's happening without, getting involved in it. And then to relish in a positive state of mind, like gratitude, like metta, like compassion, all these states we've been training. And then to remain with that and to keep doing that over and over again until the hindrances are temporarily, at least, at bay. They're not going to come up and distract us away. And so it's after a few of those reps, normally the mind at some point might enter this state of samadhi where now it's just staying present on its own. It's not wavering here and there. And that can happen in just a few seconds. It can happen all at once, where there's a kind of burst of joy that comes up. So, one more time, the way to apply this both in your sitting meditation and in your daily life is to recognize when there's a mental obstacle, a hindrance, a major prediction error, where your mind is wanting something, where your mind is disliking what's happening, where your mind is sluggish, there's doubt there's some kind of restlessness or worries. Any of these negative contracted states that's going to shrink your mind down. And we kind of take them personally, like we think that's us. Like, I need this, I need this, I need this. So you recognize that. And then you release and relax the tension from that distraction, like opening your awareness up. You just kind of note it. You're not pushing it away and trying to direct your attention somewhere else, like snap it in a certain, oh, why am I thinking that? I should be thinking this. No, it's more of this opening up of awareness, relaxing the body, relaxing the mind. So that's the release step. Then third is to relish. We enjoy with a smile. We can bring up a positive mental state. We can even just smile sometimes, which can be enough. And then fourth is to remain, just to observe this positive state of mind, like watching a movie. You've stepped out and now the process unfolds on its own. You don't have to try, you don't have to focus, you just remain. Wonderful. So I'll see you tomorrow for some more training, and we'll talk about some of the deeper states of consciousness that this self-transcendent process can lead to. Enjoy your day.